The snowstorm arrived without warning, sweeping across the neighborhood with a violence that made the world outside disappear beneath a curtain of white. By evening, the roads were buried, the trees bent under heavy ice, and the power lines swayed dangerously in the screaming wind. Inside my small house, the fireplace crackled softly, fighting against the cold creeping through the walls. I wrapped my hands around a mug of tea and stood near the living room window, watching snow swirl endlessly beneath the streetlights. The entire town felt abandoned. No cars passed. No footsteps echoed outside. Just the constant howl of winter beating against the glass. I had almost decided to head upstairs for the night when a faint movement near the front gate caught my attention. At first, I thought it was only the wind shifting shadows across the snow. Then lightning flashed somewhere in the distance, briefly illuminating the street. A man stood outside my house. He looked ancient beneath the storm, his body hunched against the freezing wind as snow collected on his shoulders and hat. One hand gripped the gate for support while the other held tightly to a leash. Beside him stood a large German shepherd with thick black and brown fur dusted white by snowflakes. Even from inside, I could see the animal trembling from the cold. My chest tightened instantly. Nobody should have been out there in weather like this. I hurried to the front door and pulled it open. The icy wind slammed into me so hard it stole my breath. Snow blew across the porch and scattered into the hallway behind me. "Sir," I called out over the storm. "Are you all right?" The old man looked up slowly. His face was pale from the cold, lined deeply with age and exhaustion. His beard carried tiny crystals of ice, and his watery blue eyes seemed cautious, almost startled that someone had spoken to him at all. "We're fine," he replied weakly, though his shaking body said otherwise. The dog stayed pressed against his side, alert and protective. Its dark eyes locked onto me immediately, studying me with surprising intensity. "You can't stay out here," I said. "Please, come inside before you freeze." The old man hesitated for several seconds, glancing down at the dog as though silently discussing the decision with him. Finally, he nodded once. "Only until the storm settles," he said quietly. "We won't cause trouble." I stepped aside quickly. Of course. The German shepherd entered first. Its large paws clicked against the wooden floor as melted snow dripped from its fur. Despite looking exhausted, the dog moved carefully through the house, scanning every corner with sharp attention before finally stopping near the fireplace. Only then did the animal seem to relax slightly. The old man followed more slowly. Up close, I could see how badly his hands trembled. His coat was old and worn thin at the elbows, barely enough protection against the brutal cold outside. I grabbed a towel from the kitchen and handed it to him. "Here," I said gently. "Sit near the fire." "Thank you," he murmured. His voice carried the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than lack of sleep. The dog remained standing beside him, watching me every second. I tried offering a small smile. "What's his name?" For the first time since entering the house, the old man's expression softened. "Brutus," he said, resting a weathered hand against the dog's neck. "He's been with me a long time." Brutus lifted his head slightly at the sound of his name but never looked away from me. Almost as if he was deciding whether I could be trusted to, the warmth inside the house slowly began to push back the bitter cold carried in by the storm. Snow melted into small puddles beneath Brutus's paws while the fire painted flickering orange light across the living room walls. I brought out an extra blanket for Walter and set a bowl of water near the fireplace for the dog. Brutus drank cautiously without taking his eyes off me for very long, as though years of surviving beside his owner had taught him never to fully relax. Walter sat quietly on the couch, warming his trembling hands around the mug of tea I'd made for him. Up close, he looked even more exhausted than before. Deep lines marked his face, and there was something heavy behind his eyes, the kind of sadness that settled into a person permanently after enough hard years. "You live alone?" he asked softly after a while. "Mostly," I replied. "My younger sister stays here sometimes." Walter nodded slowly, staring into the fire. Outside, the storm continued raging against the windows. Branches scraped across the roof while the wind moaned through the trees like distant voices. The entire house seemed wrapped in darkness and snow. Then headlights flashed through the curtains. A car pulled into the driveway. "Oh great," I muttered. "That'll be Claire." A moment later, the front door burst open, letting in another blast of freezing wind. My sister stumbled inside carrying grocery bags, her cheeks red from the cold and her boots covered in snow. You would not believe the traffic, she groaned, kicking the door shut behind her. Half the roads are blocked and some idiot nearly slid into. She stopped mid-sentence. Brutus had risen to his feet. The growl started low in his throat, deep and threatening enough to freeze the entire room instantly. Every muscle in the dog's body tightened as he stared directly at Claire. Not barking, not frightened, warning. Claire blinked in confusion. Ah, what's his problem? Brutus, Walter said firmly. But the dog ignored him. The growl deepened as Claire slowly set the grocery bags onto the kitchen counter. I forced an awkward laugh. He's probably just nervous around strangers. Yeah, Claire said uneasily, trying to smile. Well, I'm nervous around Cujo over there. Brutus took one step forward. Walter immediately grabbed the dog's collar, though even he looked disturbed by the reaction. That's enough, he muttered quietly to the animal. For several tense seconds, nobody spoke. Then Brutus finally backed down, though his eyes never left Claire's face. She noticed it too. Seriously, she whispered to me while taking off her coat, that dog is staring at me like he knows me. I shrugged, trying to dismiss the strange tension crawling through the room. Maybe you smell like another dog. Funny. Dinner turned uncomfortable after that. I reheated leftover soup while Claire unpacked groceries with exaggerated movements, clearly trying to pretend the incident hadn't bothered her. Walter remained polite but distant, answering questions with short replies. Meanwhile Brutus lay beside the couch, completely silent except for the occasional low rumble whenever Claire walked too close. At one point, she reached across the table for salt. Brutus growled again immediately. Claire jerked her hand back. Okay, seriously, what is wrong with him? Walter frowned deeply now. He doesn't usually behave this way. You mean usually? He's a good judge of people, Walter answered quietly. The words landed harder than I expected. Claire rolled her eyes, though I noticed her hands tightening slightly around her spoon. Well, that's comforting. The rest of the evening dragged on beneath a blanket of tension nobody could explain. Even after dinner, Brutus continued tracking Claire's every movement through the house. If she walked into the kitchen, his ears twitched. If she climbed the stairs, his head followed her. Hours later, after Walter had fallen asleep on the couch beneath the blanket I'd given him, I turned off the downstairs lights and prepared for bed. The storm outside had grown even worse, rattling the windows hard enough to shake the frames. That was when I noticed Brutus standing perfectly still at the bottom of the staircase. The dog wasn't looking at me. He was staring upstairs toward Claire's bedroom. A soft growl vibrated in the darkness as the fur along his spine slowly began to rise again. I stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, staring at Brutus while the storm raged outside the house. The dog didn't move. His body remained stiff and alert, ears raised high as a low growl rolled steadily from deep inside his chest. The sound barely seemed natural anymore. It carried something almost human in it, fear mixed with anger. Brutus, I whispered carefully. Come here, boy. The German shepherd ignored me completely. His eyes stayed locked on the dark hallway upstairs. A cold uneasiness crept through my stomach. I glanced toward Walter sleeping on the couch, but exhaustion had knocked him out completely. His breathing remained slow and heavy beneath the blanket. Another growl escaped Brutus. Then suddenly he bolted upstairs. Brutus, I hissed, racing after him. His claws scraped loudly against the wooden steps as he charged down the hallway straight toward Claire's bedroom door. Before I could stop him, he began scratching furiously at the wood, snarling under his breath. Claire woke instantly. What the hell is happening? She shouted from inside. I reached for the dog's collar, but Brutus jerked away, barking sharply now. The noise echoed through the hallway, mixing with the violent wind outside. Walter appeared at the top of the stairs moments later, looking disoriented but alarmed. The second he saw Brutus at Claire's door, his expression changed completely. Not confusion, recognition. Claire yanked the bedroom door open angrily. Get this mutt away from me. Brutus pushed past her the instant the door opened. Brutus, stop, I shouted. The dog rushed into the room, nose working frantically as if searching for something invisible. Claire backed away toward her bed, pale with shock while Brutus circled once before heading straight for her dresser. Then he stopped. A vicious snarl ripped from his throat. His teeth bared fully as he focused on the bottom drawer. The room went silent except for the storm outside. Walter slowly stepped into the doorway beside me, staring at the dresser with narrowed eyes. His face had lost all warmth now. Open it, he said quietly. Claire blinked at him. What? The drawer, Walter repeated. Open it. This is insane, Claire snapped nervously. It's just a dog. But Brutus continued snarling at the dresser, scratching aggressively against the wood now. His behavior no longer seemed random. He was certain about something. I looked at Claire. Just open it so he calms down. Her face tightened. For one brief second, I saw genuine panic flash through her eyes. That terrified me more than the dog. Slowly, Claire walked toward the dresser. Her hands trembled as she reached for the handle. See, she muttered weakly. There's nothing in here except clothes. She pulled the drawer open halfway. Sweaters, jeans, nothing unusual. I let out a shaky breath, almost relieved. Then Brutus barked sharply and shoved his nose beneath the folded clothes. An envelope slid forward, thick, bulging. The color drained from Claire's face instantly. My heartbeat slowed into stunned disbelief as I pulled the envelope free and opened it. Cash, stacks of it, thousands of dollars. Claire, I whispered. She immediately started shaking her head. Emma, wait. Walter stepped closer, staring at the envelope with cold, hollow eyes. Brutus remembers sense, he said quietly. Nobody moved. The dog remained planted in front of the dresser, growling softly at Claire now instead of the drawer. Walter's voice grew heavier with each word. Even after years, he remembers. Claire's breathing became uneven. I don't know what you think this is. You worked at the nursing home in Millfield, Walter interrupted. Silence crashed over the room. The storm outside suddenly felt far away. Claire's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Walter looked older than ever standing there beneath the hallway light, his tired eyes locked onto my sister's terrified face. My wife lived there, he said softly. Before she died, a horrible feeling settled into my chest. I remembered the stories now. The missing money, the investigation, the elderly residents who claimed someone had been stealing from them while management insisted there was no proof. Brutus barked once more, sharp and angry, while Claire slowly backed away from the dresser like her legs could barely hold her upright anymore. Claire's knees finally gave out beneath her, and she sank onto the edge of the bed with trembling hands covering her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks almost instantly, but nobody rushed to comfort her. The room had turned painfully still except for the sound of the storm battering the house outside. Brutus stood beside Walter like a silent guard, his dark eyes fixed on Claire without blinking. I can explain, Claire whispered weakly. Walter said nothing. His face looked drained of emotion now, as though the anger had burned itself out long ago and left behind only exhaustion. He slowly lowered himself into the chair near the bedroom wall, one hand resting against Brutus's back. You stole from them, he said quietly. Claire shook her head quickly. Not like that, I wasn't hurting anyone. You stole from old people who couldn't defend themselves. Her breathing became shaky and uneven. I needed money back then. Walter stared at her for several long seconds before speaking again. My wife had dementia, he said softly. Some days she forgot my name. Some days she thought I was a stranger visiting her room. His voice remained calm, but every word seemed heavier than the last. She kept telling me money was disappearing from her purse. He swallowed hard. The nurses said she was confused. The doctors said memory loss made patients imagine things. Claire looked down at the floor, unable to meet his eyes. But Brutus always reacted whenever you came near her, Walter continued. Every single time. The dog gave a faint growl, almost as if confirming the memory himself. Walter's hand moved gently through Brutus's fur. Dogs remember scents differently than people do. Fear, guilt, anger. They don't forget. I stood frozen beside the dresser, still clutching the envelope of cash. My thoughts felt tangled and numb. Claire had always been reckless growing up, always chasing quick solutions to her problems, but this was something darker than I ever imagined. How much? I asked quietly. Claire wiped at her face. I don't know anymore. How long were you stealing? She broke down completely then, sobbing into her hands. Months, she admitted. Just small amounts at first. Nobody noticed, so I kept doing it. The confession hit harder than I expected. Walter closed his eyes briefly, and for the first time I noticed tears gathering there too. My wife died believing everyone thought she was crazy, he whispered. Nobody spoke after that. The storm outside had begun weakening, but the silence inside the room felt unbearable. Brutus finally stopped growling, though he never moved away from Walter's side. Claire looked toward him through tears. I'm sorry, she whispered. Walter opened his eyes slowly. There was no rage in them. That somehow felt worse. You don't get to apologize to me, he said quietly. You should have apologized to them while they were still alive. Claire lowered her head again, unable to answer. Hours passed after that. None of us slept. Near dawn, the snowstorm finally began to fade. Pale gray morning light filtered through the windows while the wind outside softened into silence. Walter quietly gathered his few belongings without asking for breakfast or coffee. He folded the blanket neatly before placing it back on the couch. Brutus waited patiently near the front door. Claire remained upstairs the entire time. As Walter prepared to leave, I finally found the courage to speak. You could report her, I said softly. Walter paused. She should report herself, he replied. Then he rested one weathered hand against Brutus's neck and looked at me with tired but gentle eyes. You gave strangers warmth tonight, he said. Don't let this change that about you. I felt tears sting my eyes as I opened the front door for them. Fresh snow covered the world outside in a blanket of white silence. Walter stepped onto the porch carefully while Brutus walked beside him, steady and loyal to the very end. Before disappearing down the street, the dog stopped once and looked back toward the house one final time.